In the last movie, we saw where the configuration options for setting up mail in PHP reside. And even though you may not have actually changed any of those options, at least you know where they are in case you need to fiddle with them to try and get things to work. In this movie, we're actually going to attempt to send mail using PHP's mail function. Now I want to repeat that this may not work for you. You may not have send mail installed, you may not have it enabled, something else might go wrong. You can try and fix it, you can Google on the internet and look for some solutions, but I wouldn't knock yourself out because we're going to find a better solution when we get to SMTP servers and PHP mailer. And so all this is really just a very primitive way to send mail using PHP, and it might be worth it just to wait and go ahead and do it the more advanced, more robust way a little later on. Sending email in PHP is very simple. We just have the mail function. It takes 4 arguments. Who's the mail to? What's the mail subject? What's the mail message? And then the headers. And we'll talk more about headers in the next section. But those are the 4 arguments that we provide to mail, and PHP then sends an email for us. Nice and simple. Let's go to our B2B sandbox and we'll try it out there in a sample file. So as you can see, I'm in my B2B sandbox here. I've closed up my photo gallery. We'll come back to that a little later. We're just going to try a sample file. So I'll go into TextMate and just open up a new file. Go ahead and save that file in the B2B sandbox. You want to make sure you're in that sandbox again. And I'm going to call it sendemail.php. And that'll be the name of my file. We'll go ahead and put our PHP tags in there. And to get us started, let's go ahead and put in that mail function. So we have mail, to, subject, message, and headers. All we need to do now is establish these variables for to, subject, message, and headers, and then PHP will execute that mail function and try and send our mail. So let's take a look at each one in turn. To, it's just simply who is this email going to be to. I'm going to put in junkmail@novafabrica.com. That's an email address that I can test and that I have access to. You won't want to use that. You'll want to use your own email account. An email account that you have the ability to log in and check and make sure that the message was received successfully. Now there are a couple of other ways that we can set the to variable. One is like this. I put my name and then put the email address inside the tags, right? The left less than sign and the greater than sign with a space in between. Now Windows doesn't always handle that well. So if you try it and it doesn't work on Windows, you'll want to go back to doing it this way. But you might go ahead and just give it a shot, see if you can do it. What it does is it sends both the name along with the email address. And then the person's email client will be able to display their name instead of their email address. The email address will exist. They can use it if it needs to. You've probably seen that at work in your email program before. The second thing I want to show you is multiple recipients. All we have to do is put a comma and a space, and then we can list out multiple recipients. We can combine these two also, and we can provide the name for one person, and then just simply the email address for a second person. So let's move on to our second argument. The second thing is the subject, and the subject is nice and easy. We just say mail test. That's our subject. I'm going to go ahead and do something that I think is a little bit nicer than that, and that is to say mail test at, and go ahead and provide the time. I'm using string for time, and percent time just simply summarizes the hour, the minute, and the second for me in a nice simple format. So it'll take the current time, output it in a nice format, and then my subject will reflect what time this mail was sent. So if I send 5 different ones, I'll be able to tell exactly which one I'm looking at each time. The third argument is easy as well. It's just the message string. So that's going to be the string of our message. You can make it be absolutely anything you want. I do want to point out one additional thing about the message string though, which is that there are a lot of old email servers and programs out there that clip lines that are longer than a certain length. So if you just send a message as one really long string, if it gets past that certain line length, it could potentially clip it. Now in 99% of the cases, it's going to go through no problem. This clipping of email messages was a big problem more like 5 or 7 years ago. A lot of it's been worked out now, and I'd say it's only in very rare cases, but it's still not a bad idea to go ahead and use word wrap to force the lines to wrap at a certain length. Now I've heard that that length should be 70, 72, 75, 78. 70 is what I'm going to go with as a nice safe thing to make sure that it's always going to be each line shorter than what those old servers are going to clip it at. So now, before we get to the headers, let's stop and look. You may notice that we're missing our from field. We don't have any way to indicate who the message is from. Now we could have set a default from in the php.ini file. We saw how to do that, but we may not want to use that default. We may have several different applications all running on the same server, all using the same PHP installation, and they may be running under different domains. and they may all be using different email addresses. Well, even though it's not very intuitive, the way that we specify who the email is from is by putting it in the headers. And this is the way I'm going to suggest that you do it. Go ahead and do the from variable, just like you did to. It works exactly the same way. You have the same kinds of options. And then when you start building your headers, and we'll talk headers in the next movie, we're going to do from : space, and then whatever that from field is. And that will then be who our email message is from. So now we've provided those 4 arguments to mail, and if we run this script, it will send the mail. But I want to add one more improvement, which is result equals. Mail will return true and false depending on whether or not PHP was successful in sending it. Now, just because PHP was successful does not mean that the message has actually gotten to the recipient. There are going to be a number of steps between here and there, junk mail filters and other servers, that may keep it from actually getting received. It's a little bit like dropping a letter in a mailbox at the post office. Most likely, it will get there fine, but something could happen, and your letter might not arrive. This works the same way. PHP has successfully dropped our email into the letterbox, and most likely it will get to the recipient, but something could still go wrong along the way. So once I have that true or false, I'm just going to have it simply display either sent or error, so we'll be able to see. Let's save this file, and let's try it out. I'll open up Firefox, and I'll go to B2B Sandbox, and then send email.php. Sent. So PHP thinks that it has successfully sent this file. So let's see if we can receive it. I'll go into my mailbox. I'm just using Apple's mail program. I'll click Get Mail, and there it is. It arrived. So here's my email. It has the timestamp on it. If I open it up, there it is. This is a test. Now, if I choose an option here in the mail program, I can say View Message, and I can say Raw Source. And this will let me actually see the raw email message. The mail program is taking this and pulling out the relevant bits to make it look a little nicer so I don't have to look at all this ugliness. But these are the headers of the message. And in the next movie, we'll talk about how we can work with these headers.